My husband suddenly won't let me hug or kiss him. When I try to, he pushed me away and called the cops. My 36F husband, 34M, married for 2 years and together for 5, used to be very affectionate with each other in a way that was playful, flirty, and warm. A couple months ago, he decided I was too clingy and that he wanted to be the one to initiate all physical contact from then on. I do not think I was too clingy. I initiated hugs and kisses a few times a day with a few other casual touches like a hand on the shoulder, but was very far from touching him every second. I know he has also been coming to terms with some issues from a difficult childhood at that time. Not physical abuse, more emotional abandonment and alienation issues with his parents. So I wanted to give him space and not make this about me, especially as he promised to continue being regularly affectionate. And he has done so, maybe a bit less than before, but we still have some affectionate touches initiated by him. Every day and more cuddle activities a couple times a week. Used to be more like 3 to 4 times a week, but again, I know he is going through some stuff. A few days ago, I found out at work I had gotten a big promotion and bonus. When I got home, I was so excited that I threw my arms around him, thereby violating his rule that he needed to be the one to initiate contact. He immediately pushed me away and got extremely angry. It was not a cuddly hug at all, more like the kind you see sports team members giving each other when they win a big game. I tried to apologize, but he started yelling about how I am an abuser and traumatized him. He asked me to leave. I quickly packed a few things and went to a motel, not wanting things to escalate further. I understand from his brother that after I left, he tried to go to the police to press charges, but they said that a quick hug from one's wife, even if not really wanted/expected, was not the kind of thing they're going to prosecute. He is now threatening to call my employer to tell them I am an abuser who engages in cuddly misconduct in my personal life. I am not asking for legal advice about that here. What I am asking is, honestly, would he be justified in telling my employer about what happened? I did make a terrible mistake, even if it wasn't malicious. I believe people are allowed to determine that they don't want others to initiate touch and should have bodily autonomy. Just because I wouldn't be traumatized over a hug doesn't mean he shouldn't be. I am willing to accept that he may very well divorce me over this and that I may lose other important friendships and family relationships. But should I also lose my job? My job is working with other adults in an office, not vulnerable people. I don't and have never initiated physical contact with coworkers except an occasional handshake or accepting a high five. Update 1. So, things came to a head, but not in the way I was expecting. My husband's brother, Bil, continued to stay with him while I stayed at a hotel. After a couple days, I got a call from Bil asking me to come home so that we could all talk. He assured me I would be safe. Turns out, my husband has been having an affair with an intern at his company, 21F, and is deeply in love and wants to be with her. He told Bil this shortly after I left. He wanted to make me the bad guy, so first started with the no touching rule, figuring I would get fed up with it, or that eventually I would make a mistake and he could use that to claim I was an abuser. That is what happened. So that I would be the bad guy. It was also a way to reduce intimacy of all types with me while he was falling out of love with me and in love with his affair partner. So, he made up the stuff about trauma flaring up and isn't actually having a psychotic break, although obviously has some level of mental problems to do something so cruel. For what it's worth, he did apologize, sort of. Said he was just so in love with the other woman and couldn't deal with hurting me directly by leaving me right away, so came up with this plan. And just got a little too caught up in character when I gave him the mistaken hug with calling me an abuser, making a police report and threatening my job. We sat down and talked about everything with Bil as mediator and agreed to a cordial and quick divorce. Dividing assets 50-50ths. Thankfully no pets or kids. I know I could probably make things harder for him under the circumstances, but I really just want to move on as soon as possible and put this all behind me. I have a good job/income and don't need anything from him other than my freedom. ASAP. I appreciate everyone who commented and all who sent me messages. Apologies for not responding personally to everyone, but was a bit overwhelmed. Even though things went in an unexpected direction, it was so helpful to see that what was happening wasn't normal and also helped me to prepare for the truth when it came out. Thank you. Update 2. Hey everyone. It's been a whirlwind since my last update, and I just wanted to fill you all in on what's been happening. So, after we agreed on the cordial and quick divorce, I thought things would start to settle down. I couldn't have been more wrong. Firstly, I got the papers drawn up and sent over to my soon-to-be ex, STBX. He signed them quickly, which was a relief, but then things took a turn. My Bil, who had been a rock through all of this, let slip that SDBX was planning a grand romantic gesture for his affair partner, AP, that involved a trip to Paris. Great, I thought, let them have each other. But here's where it gets interesting. 2 days after I moved back into our house, since SDBX moved out to stay with AP, I got a knock on the door. It was AP. She was crying, looked a mess, and was holding a suitcase. She asked if she could come in, and against my better judgment, I let her. Turns out, she had no idea about the extent of SDBX's deceit. He had been stringing her along with promises of a future together, but had also been seeing another woman, let's call her OW, on the side. AP found out about OW and was devastated, feeling betrayed and used. We sat in my living room, both a mess, and shared our stories. It was cathartic in a way. AP apologized profusely for her part in my marriage falling apart, and I could see she was genuinely remorseful. She had been caught up in his charm and lies, just like I had been. By the end of our conversation, we decided that we both needed to confront him together. The next day, we arranged to meet him at a cafe. I arrived first, with AP following shortly after. When SDBX walked in and saw us both, his face turned pale. We didn't waste any time. AP started by asking him why he had lied to her, why he had made promises he couldn't keep. Then, I jumped in, asking him how he could be so manipulative and cruel. He stuttered, tried to make excuses, but eventually just sat there silently as we tore into him. Finally, after what felt like hours, he apologized. But it wasn't the apology I wanted. It was half-hearted, more about him feeling sorry for himself than for the pain he caused. We left him there, looking defeated, and walked out together. AP thanked me for giving her the chance to confront him and said she was going to stay with a friend for a while to figure things out. I thought that would be the end of it, but oh, was I wrong. A week later, I was at work when I got a call from my HR department. My heart sank as I walked into the meeting room, thinking the worst. Turns out, SDBX had called them, trying to spin the story that I was an abuser and had been violent with him. Luckily, I had already spoken to HR about the situation after my initial post, so they were prepared. They assured me that they had my back and that his claims were unfounded. But that wasn't the only bombshell. AP called me later that day, frantic. She had found out that SDBX had been embezzling money from his company. She had stumbled across some suspicious transactions while she was still at his place and confronted him. He denied it, of course, but she had enough evidence to go to the authorities. I couldn't believe the audacity of this man. He had not only ruined our marriage, manipulated and lied to multiple women, but was also engaging in illegal activities. I knew then that I needed to take more drastic measures. I contacted a lawyer and decided to pursue a more aggressive divorce settlement. I wanted to make sure that SDBX couldn't just walk away unscathed. Meanwhile, AP decided to go to the police with her evidence. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, police, and trying to keep up with work. One day, I came home to find a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. No note, just flowers. I was suspicious, but they were beautiful, so I brought them inside. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. Did you like the flowers? SDBX. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why was he sending me flowers? Was this some twisted way of trying to win me back? I decided to ignore it and blocked the number. But then, the next day, there was another bouquet, and another the day after that, each one more elaborate than the last. I finally broke down and called my BIL, who had been staying out of the mess since the confrontation at the cafe. He was shocked to hear about the flowers and promised to talk to SDBX. The flowers stopped for a while, and I thought maybe he had finally gotten the message. But then, one night, I heard a noise outside my house. I peeked through the curtains and saw SDBX standing in the yard, looking up at my window. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I did the next day. That seemed to be the final straw. After that, things started to calm down. The divorce was finalized, with me getting a larger share of the assets due to his infidelity and illegal activities. AP and I kept in touch for a while, supporting each other as we moved on from the nightmare that was SDBX. But the story doesn't end here. Just when I thought I could finally put everything behind me, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered it. It was OW. She had found out about everything and wanted to meet up. Update 3. So, I met with OW at a small cafe downtown. She looked just as exhausted as I felt. It was clear she had been through a lot as well. As we sipped our coffee, she began to share her story, and I realized that my ex-husband was even more deceptive than I had imagined. OW, let's call her Sarah, had been with SDBX for almost a year. She had no idea about me or AP. He had told her he was single, living alone, and working late hours, which explained why they couldn't spend more time together. Sarah was understandably devastated when she found out about everything. She had even started to suspect that something was off, but SDBX always had an excuse ready to cover his tracks. As we exchanged stories, Sarah revealed that she had also found suspicious transactions related to SDBX's finances. It appeared that he had been embezzling money for quite some time, and the sums were substantial. We both agreed that it was time to take more definitive action. With the evidence Sarah had, we decided to approach the authorities together to strengthen the case against him. Over the next few weeks, we worked closely with the police, providing them with all the information and evidence we had gathered. AP, Sarah, and I formed an unlikely alliance, united by our common goal of seeing SDBX face justice. It was oddly empowering to work together and support each other through this mess. In the midst of all this, I started to notice some positive changes in my life. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, threw myself into my work, and even started a new hobby, painting. It was therapeutic and helped me regain a sense of control and purpose. One evening, as I was working on a new piece, I received a call from my lawyer. They had good news. The police had gathered enough evidence to arrest SDBX. He was being charged with embezzlement, fraud, and harassment. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, it seemed like justice was being served. However, the relief was short-lived. The next morning, I found another bouquet of flowers on my doorstep, this time with a note. "You may have won the battle, but the war isn't over. SDBX." My heart sank. How was he still able to get to me? I called the police immediately, and they assured me they would look into it. In the meantime, I decided to stay with a friend for a while, just to be safe. It was unsettling to think that even behind bars, SDBX still had ways to intimidate me. As the days turned into weeks, the police continued their investigation, and the trial date was set. AP, Sarah, and I were all scheduled to testify. It was nerve-wracking, but we knew it was necessary to ensure SDBX faced the consequences of his actions. On the day of the trial, I was a bundle of nerves. Walking into the courtroom and seeing SDBX sitting there, looking smug and defiant, almost made me lose my resolve. But then I saw AP and Sarah sitting together, giving me encouraging smiles. Their presence gave me the strength I needed. Testifying was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Reliving the manipulation, the betrayal, and the fear was emotionally draining. But as each of us shared our stories, it became clear that SDBX's web of lies was unraveling. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge didn't seem to have much sympathy for his sob story about being misunderstood and in love. When the verdict was finally read, and SDBX was found guilty on all charges, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It was the end of a chapter, but it also marked the beginning of a long journey to heal from the trauma he had caused. He was sentenced to several years in prison, and the judge issued a restraining order to ensure he couldn't contact any of us. Life after the trial was an adjustment. I moved to a new apartment, started seeing a therapist regularly, and focused on rebuilding my life. AP moved back to her hometown to be closer to her family, and Sarah and I kept in touch, often meeting for coffee and to catch up. Months passed, and slowly but surely, I started to feel more like myself again. I even began dating, taking things slow and being cautious, but it felt good to open myself up to the possibility of love once more. I realized that SDBX's actions didn't define me, and I deserved happiness just as much as anyone else. One day, as I was walking home from work, I received a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it, fearing it might be another message from SDBX. But it wasn't. It was from BIL, asking if we could meet. He said he had something important to tell me. My curiosity was piqued, and despite my reservations, I agreed. We met at a park near my apartment. BIL looked anxious, and as we sat on a bench, he began to speak. He had recently visited SDBX in prison and learned that there were other women we didn't know about, who might also be victims of his manipulation and deceit. BIL felt it was his duty to track them down and make sure they were okay. He asked if I would help him, given my experience and knowledge of SDBX's patterns. It was a lot to take in, but I agreed. I felt a sense of responsibility to help these other women, just as AP and Sarah had helped me. Our journey wasn't over yet, and I knew there were still battles to be fought. Update 4. After my last post, BIL and I threw ourselves into the task of uncovering the full extent of SDBX's deceit. We reached out to old friends, co-workers, and even some of his distant relatives. It was a lot of legwork, but we started to piece together a clearer picture of his tangled web. What we found was even more shocking than we could have imagined. First, let me introduce you to Jane. She was a former co-worker of SDBX who had left the company abruptly about 6 months before our separation. Jane had been charmed by SDBX's charisma and had a brief fling with him, not knowing he was married. When she found out about me, she ended things and left the company to avoid further complications. Jane was still angry, but grateful we reached out. She had no idea how deep his manipulations ran. Next, we found Emily, another woman SDBX had strung along with promises of a future together. Emily had been more involved, even lending him money when he claimed he was in financial trouble. She was devastated to learn the truth and felt betrayed, not just by SDBX, but by her own misplaced trust. She was eager to join our cause and help track down any other victims. With Jane and Emily on board, our small team felt more empowered. We were determined to bring SDBX's entire scheme to light, not just for our own closure, but to prevent him from hurting anyone else in the future. Then, we discovered something truly unsettling. During our investigation, we found a woman named Lisa who had a son that she believed was SDBX's. She had been in a relationship with him around the same time he was seeing me, AP, and Sarah. Lisa had no idea he was married or seeing other women. She was heartbroken to learn the truth, but more than that, she was furious that he had abandoned their child without any support or acknowledgement. We encouraged Lisa to take legal action to ensure her son received the support he deserved. It was another blow to SDBX, who was already facing multiple legal battles. The authorities were now looking into his fraudulent activities, embezzlement, and the various ways he had manipulated and deceived women. Throughout this process, my relationship with BIL grew stronger. He was my rock, helping me navigate the emotional turmoil while also being a dedicated ally in our mission. I realized that despite everything, I was lucky to have supportive people around me. One evening, as we were going over our findings, BIL looked at me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's one more person we need to talk to. Our parents." The thought hadn't crossed my mind, but he was right. SDBX's parents deserved to know what their son had done, and maybe they could provide some insight into his behavior. We arranged a meeting with them at a neutral location. They were shocked when we laid everything out: the affairs, the embezzlement, the lies. SDBX's mother broke down in tears, unable to comprehend how her son could do such things. His father was stoic, but you could see the disappointment and anger in his eyes. They thanked us for bringing everything to their attention and promised to support the legal actions against him. It was a difficult conversation, but it felt necessary. We needed everyone to understand the gravity of the situation. As the trial dates for SDBX's various charges approached, our little group of survivors and allies felt a sense of solidarity. We were all connected by this shared trauma, but also by our determination to see justice served. It was empowering to stand together, knowing that we were not alone. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was filled with tension. SDBX looked haggard and defeated, a far cry from the confident man I once knew. As each of us took the stand and shared our stories, the weight of his actions became undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge showed no leniency. When the verdict was read, and SDBX was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for his crimes, there was a collective sigh of relief. It was over. Finally, we could all begin to heal and move forward with our lives. But life, as it often does, had one more twist in store for me. A few weeks after the trial, I received an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply read, "I know what he did to you." My heart raced as I opened it. The message was from a woman named Claire. She had recently discovered she was also one of SDBX's victims and had stumbled upon my story while searching for answers. Claire's story was eerily similar to ours, but with one key difference: she had been recording their conversations. She had evidence that could potentially implicate others who might have been involved in SDBX's schemes, either knowingly or unknowingly. She asked if we could meet to discuss the next steps. I was hesitant but curious. What more could there be? I agreed to meet Claire at a public place, just to be safe. When we met, she handed me a flash drive. "Everything you need to know is on there," she said. "I'm trusting you to do the right thing." I took the drive home, and plugged it into my laptop. The files contained hours of recorded conversations between Claire and SDBX, detailing his manipulations, his financial schemes, and even mentions of accomplices. It was a goldmine of information, but also a Pandora's box. As I listened to the recordings, a chilling realization washed over me. This wasn't just about personal vendettas or failed relationships. SDBX's actions had far-reaching implications, potentially involving a network of people who enabled or turned a blind eye to his behavior. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I reached out to Bill, AP, Sarah, Jane, and Emily, sharing the new information with them. We needed to decide our next move carefully. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about uncovering the full extent of the truth. As we sat around my living room, discussing our options, there was a knock on the door. We all exchanged nervous glances. I got up to answer it, and there stood Claire, looking anxious. "I think I'm being followed," she whispered. "We need to be careful." And just like that, the sense of closure I had begun to feel was shattered. The stakes were higher than ever, and we were plunged into a new, more dangerous phase of this saga. Who was following Claire? How deep did this conspiracy go? And most importantly, how are we going to expose the truth without putting ourselves in harm's way? Update 5. Hey everyone, I know it's been a while since my last post, but so much has happened. This will be my final update, and I hope it brings some closure not only to me but also to everyone who's been following this saga. After Claire's warning about being followed, our group knew we had to tread carefully. We met in secret, always changing locations to avoid being tracked. It was like something out of a spy movie, but the stakes were real, and we were determined to get to the bottom of this. The first thing we did was take the recordings to the authorities. With the new evidence, they reopened the investigation, this time with a broader scope. It wasn't just about SDBX anymore, it was about uncovering a potential network of corruption and deceit. In the meantime, we each took precautions. Bill and I installed security cameras around our homes, and we all made sure to check in with each other regularly. It was a tense time, but we felt stronger together. One night, as I was reviewing some of the recordings, I found a particularly incriminating conversation. SDBX had been talking to a man named Greg, who seemed to be an accomplice in the financial schemes. Greg mentioned someone higher up who was orchestrating everything. This was bigger than we thought. I handed the evidence over to the authorities, who began investigating Greg and his connections. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. It turned out SDBX had been part of a larger operation involving embezzlement, fraud, and even money laundering. The higher-up mentioned in the recordings was a well-known businessman with ties to several influential people. The police made several arrests, and the media caught wind of the story. It became a major scandal, and suddenly, our quiet little drama was front-page news. Reporters hounded us for interviews, but we declined, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. Throughout this process, Claire and I grew closer. She was incredibly brave, having come forward with such crucial evidence despite the danger. We supported each other, and it was comforting to have someone who truly understood what I was going through. One day, as we were having coffee, Claire confided in me that she had been feeling unsafe ever since she came forward. She had noticed a car following her on several occasions. We decided to take her concerns to the police, who provided her with protection and started investigating the surveillance she was under. It was a tense few weeks, but the investigation finally paid off. The police identified the people who were following Claire, private investigators hired by the businessman implicated in the recordings. With this new evidence, they were able to charge him and his associates, effectively dismantling the entire operation. SDBX, already serving time for his previous crimes, was now facing additional charges. The weight of his deceit had finally caught up with him, and there was no way out. He would be spending a long time behind bars. With the legal battles finally winding down, our group started to find some semblance of normalcy. AP moved back to her hometown, rekindling relationships with her family and starting a new job. Sarah began volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. Jane and Emily also found ways to heal, focusing on their careers and personal growth. As for me, I decided to take a leap of faith. Inspired by the strength and resilience I had discovered in myself and the others, I quit my job and started a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of fraud and manipulation. BIL became a board member, helping me build the organization from the ground up. Claire and I continued to see each other, our bond growing stronger each day. She became a key part of the nonprofit, using her experience to help others and raise awareness about the dangers of deceitful relationships. In time, I found myself healing. The nightmares and anxiety lessened, replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I was no longer defined by what SDBX had done to me, but by what I had done to overcome it. One evening, as I was closing up the office, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but something told me to answer it. It was Bill. He had just received a letter from SDBX, written from prison. He wanted to apologize, genuinely this time, acknowledging all the pain he had caused and asking for forgiveness. I sat with the letter for a long time, unsure how to feel. In the end, I decided not to respond. Forgiveness, for me, didn't mean forgetting or letting him back into my life. It meant moving on and not allowing his actions to control my future.